It's been over 3 decades since two men, disguised as police officers, rang the doorbell at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, and in the span of just 81 minutes, they made off with an estimated $500 million worth of art. The heist, which occurred on March 18, 1990, remains the most significant art theft in history, with 13 works of art still missing to this day. The sheer audacity of the crime and the lack of resolution have captivated the public's imagination, leaving many to wonder how such a brazen act could have been carried out. At the heart of the mystery is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum itself, a unique institution founded by Isabella Stewart Gardner, a prominent socialite and art collector in the early 20th century. The museum's collection, which includes works by Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Degas, among others, is renowned for its eclectic and exceptional quality. On the night of the heist, the museum's security team consisted of just 2 guards who were no match for the cunning thieves. The men, who were later described as being in their mid to late 20s, gained entry to the museum by ringing the doorbell and claiming to be responding to a disturbance. Once inside, they overpowered the guards, handcuffed them, and proceeded to roam the galleries, selectively plucking works of art from the walls. As investigators would later discover, the thieves seemed to know exactly what they were looking for, targeting specific pieces, including Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee and Vermeer's The Concert. The thieves also made off with several other works of art, including drawings, ancient Chinese vases, and a Napoleonic eagle finial. But what's particularly intriguing about this heist is that the thieves didn't just grab everything in sight. They appeared to be discriminating in their selection, opting for certain pieces over others. This level of discernment has led some to speculate that the thieves may have had inside help, or, at the very least, a deep understanding of the museum's collection. But that wasn't the strangest part. The thieves also removed the security tapes, leaving investigators with virtually no visual evidence of the crime. The investigation into the heist was led by the FBI, which launched a massive probe involving hundreds of interviews, wiretaps, and surveillance operations. Despite these efforts, the case remained stubbornly unsolved, with the FBI following up on numerous leads, only to have them fizzle out. One of the most promising leads involved a local mobster, Robert Donati, who was known to have connections to the art world. Donati was interviewed by the FBI on several occasions, but he consistently denied any involvement in the heist. However, some investigators remained convinced that Donati was hiding something, and his name continued to surface in connection with the case. But as the years went by, Donati's trail went cold, and the FBI was left to pursue other leads. As the case dragged on, the public's fascination with the heist only grew, with numerous books, articles, and documentaries exploring the mystery. Theories abounded, ranging from the plausible to the outlandish, with some speculating that the thieves were motivated by a desire to sell the artworks on the black market, while others believed that the heist was a publicity stunt gone wrong. But one thing was certain: the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist had become a cultural phenomenon, captivating the imagination of people around the world. And yet, despite the intense scrutiny, the case remained shrouded in mystery, with the artwork still missing and the thieves' identities unknown. But that wasn't the only unanswered question. What about the potential inside help, and how did the thieves manage to pull off such a daring heist without leaving behind any concrete evidence? The FBI's investigation continued to uncover new leads, including a tantalizing tip about a potential suspect, Robert Gentile, a Connecticut mobster who was known to have connections to the art world. Gentile was interviewed by the FBI in 2015, and he reportedly provided agents with detailed information about the heist, including the location of the stolen artworks. However, Gentile's claims were never corroborated, and he was ultimately not charged in connection with the case. The Gentile lead was just one of many that the FBI pursued over the years, but it highlights the complexity and the challenges of solving a case like this. The lack of concrete evidence, combined with the passage of time, has made it increasingly difficult for investigators to crack the case. But that doesn't mean that the investigation is closed. In fact, the FBI continues to receive new tips and follow up on old leads, holding out hope that one day, the stolen artworks will be recovered. As the years have passed, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist has become a kind of legend, a reminder of the enduring power of art to captivate and inspire us. The case has also raised important questions about the nature of art and its value, both cultural and monetary. The stolen artworks are, of course, priceless, but they are also irreplaceable, representing a loss not just to the museum, but to the cultural heritage of humanity. And yet, despite the gravity of the loss, the heist has also inspired a sense of awe and wonder, a testament to the ingenuity and cunning of the thieves. But that's a complicated feeling, isn't it? On the one hand, we're drawn to the thrill of the heist, but on the other, we're deeply troubled by the loss of these incredible works of art. It's a tension that gets to the heart of our relationship with art, and it's a question that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into the mystery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. As we navigate the complex emotional response to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, it's essential to examine the perpetrator's actions more closely. The thieves, disguised as police officers, gained entry to the museum by ringing the doorbell and claiming to be responding to a disturbance. Once inside, they overpowered the security guards and made their way to the galleries, where they carefully removed 13 works of art from their frames. But what's striking about this heist is the apparent lack of haste or violence, almost as if the thieves knew exactly what they were looking for and had a clear plan of action. This level of sophistication raises questions about the level of planning and expertise involved, and whether this was more than just a random act of theft. The list of stolen items is a veritable who's who of art historical giants, including Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, Vermeer's The Concert, and several works by French artist Edouard Manet. But one of the most intriguing aspects of the heist is the thieves' seeming disregard for the monetary value of the works they stole. For example, they left behind a number of highly valuable items, including a rare Chinese vase and a collection of precious jewels. This selective approach to the museum's collection has led some investigators to speculate that the thieves may have had a specific buyer or buyers in mind, rather than simply looking to sell the works on the open market. But that wasn't the strangest part, as the investigation would later reveal. The thieves also stole a number of seemingly insignificant items, including a Napoleonic eagle finial and a Chinese gu vessel. As the news of the heist spread, the FBI launched an investigation, led by Special Agent Robert Whitman, a renowned expert in art crime. Whitman's team began by reviewing the museum's security footage and conducting interviews with the staff and security guards. But the more they learned, the more complex the case seemed to become. For example, the thieves had apparently disabled the museum's security cameras, but not before one of them was caught on tape, giving investigators a glimpse of their appearance. However, the footage was grainy and didn't provide a clear identification. This led to a series of dead-end leads and false starts, as the FBI pursued various suspects and theories, only to have them ultimately prove fruitless. The investigation was further complicated by the fact that the museum's security protocols were not as robust as they could have been, with some cameras and alarms not functioning properly on the night of the heist. One of the most significant challenges facing the investigators was the lack of physical evidence left behind by the thieves. No fingerprints, no DNA, no fibers or other trace evidence. It was as if the thieves had vanished into thin air. This led some to speculate that the heist may have been an inside job, with one or more museum staff members involved. But as the investigation continued, it became clear that the museum staff had been thoroughly vetted, and there was no evidence to suggest that any of them had been involved in the heist. So, the question remained, how did the thieves manage to pull off such a daring and sophisticated heist, and what happened to the stolen artworks? The answer, or at least a partial answer, would come from an unexpected source, a former Boston mobster named Robert Donati, who would later claim to have information about the heist. Donati's story, as it emerged, was a complex and intriguing one. According to him, the heist had been planned and executed by a group of professional thieves who had been hired by a wealthy collector. But what's interesting about Donati's account is that it raises more questions than it answers. For example, who was the wealthy collector, and what was their motivation for stealing these specific works of art? And what happened to the artworks after they were stolen? Were they sold on the black market, or are they still hidden away in some private collection? The FBI's investigation would continue to follow a trail of leads and tips, but the truth about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist remained elusive, hidden behind a web of secrets and lies. But that wasn't the only twist in the story. As investigators dug deeper, they would uncover a surprising connection between the heist and a larger world of organized crime. The connection to organized crime would lead investigators down a rabbit hole of intrigue and deception as they navigated a complex web of underworld figures and shady dealers. It would also raise questions about the role of law enforcement in preventing and investigating art crime, and whether the FBI's approach to the case had been adequate. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist was more than just a simple theft. It was a symptom of a larger problem, one that highlighted the vulnerabilities of the art world and the need for greater cooperation and vigilance. The case would also spark a wider debate about the value and ownership of cultural artifacts, and whether they should be considered national treasures or private property. But as the years went by, the case remained unsolved, and the artworks remained lost, leaving behind only a trail of clues and unanswered questions. The lack of resolution in the case has led to a multitude of theories and speculations, with some believing that the artworks were stolen to order, while others think they may have been taken for ransom. Some have even suggested that the heist was a publicity stunt designed to draw attention to the museum or to the thieves themselves. But one thing is certain: the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist has become a cultural phenomenon, captivating the public imagination and inspiring countless books, films, and documentaries. The case has also had a profound impact on the art world, highlighting the need for greater security and vigilance, and leading to changes in the way that museums and galleries protect their collections. As we continue to explore the mystery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, we are drawn deeper into a world of intrigue and deception, where nothing is as it seems, and the truth remains elusive. As the investigation continued, the FBI would follow a series of leads and tips, each one leading to a new dead end or a fresh disappointment. But despite the lack of progress, the case remained in the public eye, with many people fascinated by the audacity and sophistication of the heist. The museum itself would also become a focal point for the investigation, with many people visiting the empty frames and wondering what had happened to the stolen artworks. The empty frames would become a powerful symbol of the heist, a reminder of what had been lost and a testament to the enduring power of art. But as the years went by, the frames would also become a source of frustration and disappointment, a reminder that the case remained unsolved and the artworks remained lost. The question on everyone's mind was, would the artworks ever be recovered, or would they remain lost forever, a secret known only to the thieves and their accomplices? The search for the stolen artworks would take investigators to a number of different countries, each with its own unique challenges and obstacles. From the underworld of Boston's organized crime scene to the rarefied world of international art dealers, the trail would lead to a complex and often confusing landscape. But despite the many twists and turns, the investigation would remain focused on one central question: what had happened to the stolen artworks, and who was responsible for the heist. As we continue to follow the trail of clues and leads, we are drawn deeper into a world of mystery and intrigue, where the stakes are high and the truth remains elusive. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist is a case that continues to fascinate and frustrate, a reminder that even in the most seemingly impossible cases, there is always hope for a resolution, and always a chance that the truth will finally be revealed. But for now, the case remains a mystery, a puzzle waiting to be solved, and a reminder of the enduring power of art to captivate and inspire us. When federal agents and local detectives finally breached the museum's heavy doors on the morning of March 18th, they stepped into a crime scene defined by jarring contradictions. The air was still, cold, and heavy with the scent of cut canvas. Floorboards were littered with shatterproof glass and stripped wooden stretchers. But as the FBI's evidence response team began mapping the physical evidence, they noticed something peculiar. The thieves seemed to have known exactly what they were looking for. The stolen artworks were not only some of the most valuable in the museum, but they were also located in specific areas, almost as if the thieves had a detailed floor plan of the museum. This level of planning and knowledge raised more questions than answers. How did the thieves acquire such intimate knowledge of the museum's layout and security measures? And what was the significance of the specific artworks they chose to steal? The investigation revealed that the thieves had indeed bypassed the museum's security cameras and motion detectors, but what was even more astonishing was that they seemed to have done so with ease. The security team had been watching the cameras, but they saw nothing out of the ordinary on the night of the heist. It was as if the thieves had vanished into thin air. But that wasn't the strangest part. The security guards reported that they had seen two men dressed as police officers at the museum's rear door around 1:20 a.m., claiming to be responding to a disturbance. The guards, thinking it was a legitimate police response, let them in, and the thieves quickly overpowered them, tying them up in the museum's basement. This new information added a layer of complexity to the case. If the thieves were able to disguise themselves as police officers and gain entry to the museum, it suggested a level of sophistication and planning that went beyond a simple smash and grab. The FBI began to investigate the possibility that the thieves had inside help, perhaps someone who had provided them with the detailed floor plan and security measures. But as they dug deeper, they found that the museum staff had been thoroughly vetted, and no one seemed to have any connections to the thieves. The case was becoming increasingly baffling, with each new piece of evidence raising more questions than answers. As the investigation continued, the FBI discovered that the thieves had left behind a trail of subtle clues. A piece of duct tape used to bind the security guards was found to have come from a specific manufacturer, and a stray thread from one of the thieves' clothing was discovered on the floor. These tiny details seemed insignificant on their own, but when combined, they began to paint a picture of a highly calculated and meticulous crime. The thieves had clearly thought of everything, from the fake police uniforms to the carefully planned escape route. But what about the artwork itself? What was the significance of the specific pieces they had chosen to steal? The stolen artworks included Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, Vermeer's The Concert, and several other priceless masterpieces. Each piece was not only valuable, but also held significant cultural and historical importance. The loss was not just financial. It was a blow to the art world and the cultural heritage of the nation. As the FBI delved deeper into the case, they began to suspect that the theft was not just about the monetary value of the artwork, but about something more. The thieves seemed to have a specific agenda, a motive that went beyond simple financial gain. But what could that motive be? The midpoint of the investigation revealed a shocking twist. The museum's security system had been compromised months before the heist. A former employee had been caught attempting to disable the security cameras, and although they had been fired, it seemed that the damage had already been done. The thieves had likely used this inside information to plan their attack, exploiting the weaknesses in the system to carry out the heist. This revelation reframed the entire investigation, suggesting that the theft was not just a random act of crime, but a carefully planned operation that had been months in the making. With this new information, the FBI began to re-examine the evidence, looking for any connections to the former employee or potential accomplices. They discovered that the employee had been in contact with several individuals with questionable backgrounds, including a known art thief. The investigation was now expanding, with a web of suspects and motives beginning to emerge. But as the FBI closed in on the culprits, they realized that the case was far from solved. The thieves had left behind a trail of clues, but they had also covered their tracks meticulously. The artwork remained missing, and the mystery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist continued to deepen. As the investigation continued to unfold, the FBI found themselves navigating a complex landscape of art dealers, collectors, and thieves. The case had become a global manhunt, with leads taking them from the streets of Boston to the auction houses of Europe. The stakes were high, with the recovery of the stolen artwork hanging in the balance. But the FBI was determined to solve the case, to unravel the mystery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist and bring the perpetrators to justice. The question on everyone's mind was, would they succeed, or would the artwork remain lost forever, a victim of one of the most infamous art thefts in history? The search for the stolen artwork took the FBI down a rabbit hole of twists and turns, each new lead raising hopes and disappointments in equal measure. They followed a trail of rumors and whispers, from the dark alleys of the art world to the rarefied atmosphere of high-stakes auctions. The investigation was a high-wire act, balancing the need for discretion with the urgency of recovering the stolen artwork. And yet, despite the challenges, the FBI remained resolute, driven by a determination to solve the case and bring closure to the victims. But as they delved deeper into the mystery, they began to realize that the truth behind the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist was far more complex and intriguing than they had ever imagined. The FBI's pursuit of the truth led them to a cast of characters that seemed to belong in a thriller novel: charismatic art dealers, reclusive collectors, and cunning thieves. Each person they interviewed seemed to be hiding something, and the FBI had to use all their skills and experience to separate fact from fiction. The investigation was a game of cat and mouse, with the FBI trying to stay one step ahead of the thieves and their accomplices. But as they got closer to the truth, they realized that the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist was not just a crime, it was a symptom of a larger problem, a problem that threatened the very fabric of the art world. As the investigation reached its climax, the FBI found themselves facing a daunting question: would they be able to recover the stolen artwork, or would it be lost forever? The answer, much like the artwork itself, remained elusive, hidden behind a veil of secrecy and deception. The Isabella Stewart Gardner heist had become a legendary case, a mystery that continued to fascinate and frustrate in equal measure. And yet, despite the challenges, the FBI remained committed to solving the case, driven by a determination to bring justice to the victims and restore the stolen artwork to its rightful place. But as they reflected on the case, they couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows of the art world, waiting to be uncovered. As investigators delved deeper into the art world, they began to uncover a complex web of underworld figures, corrupt dealers, and forgers, all of whom seemed to be connected in some way to the stolen artwork. One name that kept surfacing was Robert Donati, a notorious Boston gangster with ties to the Italian mafia. Donati had a reputation for being ruthless and cunning, and it was rumored that he had connections to the art world, possibly even to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum itself. But that wasn't the strangest part. Donati had actually approached the museum's director, Roland "Bump" Hadley, several years before the heist, offering to sell him a rare painting, which raised questions about whether Donati had been casing the museum all along. The more the FBI learned about Donati, the more they realized that he was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. There were whispers of a secret art market, where stolen masterpieces were bought and sold like commodities, and where the players were always one step ahead of the law. The FBI discovered that several of the stolen artworks had been offered for sale on the black market, but the deals always seemed to fall through, leaving investigators to wonder if they were dealing with a clever con artist or a genuine attempt to fence the stolen goods. As they dug deeper, they found that the trail led to a cast of characters that included shady art dealers, shifty collectors, and even a few respected members of the art community, all of whom seemed to be hiding something. But just as the investigation was gaining momentum, it hit a roadblock. The FBI's key informant, a man named Robert Gentile, who had claimed to have information about the heist, was found to be unreliable, and his stories kept changing. Gentile had been a small-time crook with ties to the mafia, but his involvement in the art world was murky at best. The FBI had hoped that he might lead them to the stolen artwork, but instead, he seemed to be leading them on a wild goose chase. As the agents struggled to separate fact from fiction, they couldn't help but wonder if they had been duped by a master manipulator. The case was getting colder by the day, and the pressure was mounting to produce results. As the years went by, the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist became a kind of legend, a reminder that even the most seemingly impenetrable institutions could be vulnerable to attack. The museum itself became a kind of shrine to the missing artwork, with empty frames serving as a poignant reminder of what had been lost. But the FBI never gave up, and they continued to follow leads, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed. They scoured the art world, looking for any sign of the stolen masterpieces, and they worked tirelessly to build a case against those responsible. And then, just when it seemed like the case was going cold, they got a tip about a possible sighting of one of the stolen paintings in a small art gallery in Europe. But that wasn't the only surprise in store for the investigators. As they dug deeper, they discovered that the gallery was owned by a man with a questionable past, and that the painting in question had been sold to him by a mysterious collector who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The more the FBI learned about the collector, the more they realized that he was a kind of ghost, a figure who seemed to be able to move undetected through the art world. He had no known address, no fixed identity, and yet he seemed to have access to some of the rarest and most valuable artworks in the world. The FBI was determined to unmask him, to find out who he was and how he was connected to the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist. But as they closed in, they realized that they were dealing with a master of disguise, a man who had spent years perfecting the art of deception. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would lead the FBI down a rabbit hole of twists and turns and raise questions about the very nature of the art world itself. And at the heart of it all was the mysterious collector, a man who seemed to be always one step ahead of the law and who was willing to do whatever it took to keep his secrets safe. As the FBI delved deeper into the collector's world, they began to uncover a complex web of shell companies, fake identities, and secret bank accounts. It was a dizzying array of deceit and misdirection, designed to conceal the collector's true identity and his connection to the stolen artwork. But the FBI was undeterred, and they worked tirelessly to unravel the threads of the collector's scheme. They followed a trail of clues that led them from the streets of Boston to the alleys of Europe, and from the high-end art galleries of New York to the secret vaults of Swiss banks. And as they dug deeper, they began to realize that the collector was just one part of a much larger network, a network of thieves, forgers, and dealers who were all working together to exploit the art world for their own gain. The FBI's investigation was raising questions about the very integrity of the art market and the role that corruption and deceit played in the buying and selling of valuable artworks. It was a sobering realization, one that threatened to undermine the trust and confidence that collectors and museums had in the system. But the FBI was determined to get to the bottom of the case, no matter where it led. They were driven by a desire for justice and a need to restore the stolen artwork to its rightful place. And as they closed in on the collector, they knew that they were getting close to the truth, but they also knew that the truth was likely to be complex and multifaceted, and that it would require all of their skill and expertise to unravel the tangled threads of the case. The investigation was a classic example of the cat-and-mouse game that often played out between law enforcement and the perpetrators of high-stakes crimes. The FBI was using every tool at its disposal to track down the collector and recover the stolen artwork, but the collector was using every trick in the book to stay one step ahead. It was a game of wits, a battle of intelligence and cunning, and it was far from over. The FBI was pushing hard to get a break in the case, to find that one piece of evidence that would crack the whole thing wide open. And as they worked tirelessly to build their case, they knew that they were getting closer to the truth, but they also knew that the truth was likely to be surprising, and that it would challenge everything they thought they knew about the art world and the people who inhabited it. As the case continued to unfold, the FBI found itself navigating a complex landscape of art dealers, collectors, and museums, all of whom seemed to be hiding something. It was a world of secrets and lies, where nothing was as it seemed, and where the truth was always hidden behind a veil of deception. But the FBI was undeterred, and they worked tirelessly to peel back the layers of deceit to get to the heart of the matter. And as they did, they began to realize that the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist was just the tip of the iceberg, a small part of a much larger problem that threatened to undermine the very foundations of the art world. The case was a wake-up call, a reminder that the art world was not always what it seemed, and that the people who inhabited it were not always what they appeared to be. And as the FBI closed in on the truth, they knew that they were about to uncover a scandal that would shock the art world to its core. As the FBI dug deeper, they began to uncover a web of connections between the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist and a cast of characters that defied easy categorization. There was Robert Gentile, a convicted felon with ties to the mafia, who claimed to have information about the stolen artwork, but seemed to be playing a cat-and-mouse game with the authorities. Then there was Robert Donati, a Boston-area mobster who had been linked to the heist through a series of cryptic messages and coded conversations. But as investigators tried to piece together the evidence, they realized that nothing was as straightforward as it seemed. Gentile's story, for instance, was riddled with inconsistencies, and Donati's involvement seemed to be shrouded in mystery. But that wasn't the strangest part. The FBI had also discovered that several of the key players in the heist had ties to the Irish Republican Army, a connection that would lead them down a rabbit hole of international intrigue. The IRA connection added a new layer of complexity to the case, as it suggested that the heist may have been more than just a simple art theft. The FBI began to investigate the possibility that the stolen artwork had been used to fund IRA operations, or even that the heist had been orchestrated by the IRA itself. But as they delved deeper into this theory, they encountered a maze of contradictions and dead ends. For example, some of the key players in the heist seem to have been motivated by a desire for personal gain, rather than any ideological commitment to the IRA. Meanwhile, others appeared to have been driven by a sense of revenge against the museum or the art world more broadly. The FBI was faced with the daunting task of untangling these competing motivations and figuring out what had really driven the thieves to carry out the heist. And yet, despite the many twists and turns, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist was just the tip of the iceberg, a symptom of a much larger problem that threatened to undermine the very foundations of the art world. As the investigation continued to unfold, the FBI found itself drawn into a world of shady dealers, corrupt collectors, and forged masterpieces. It turned out that several of the stolen artworks had been offered for sale on the black market, where they had been snapped up by unsuspecting collectors who had no idea that they were buying stolen goods. But the FBI also discovered that some of the most prominent players in the art world had been aware of the heist all along, and had even been involved in the sale of the stolen artworks. This was a shocking revelation, as it suggested that the art world was not just vulnerable to theft and forgery, but was actually complicit in these crimes. The FBI was faced with the uncomfortable truth that some of the most respected and influential figures in the art world were not what they seemed, and that the line between legitimate dealer and criminal was often blurred beyond recognition. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The FBI had also uncovered evidence of a massive forgery ring, one that had been churning out fake masterpieces for years, and had even managed to fool some of the world's top experts. The forgery ring was a game changer, as it revealed that the art world was facing a crisis of authenticity that went far beyond the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. It turned out that many of the forgeries had been created by a single master forger, a mysterious figure who had managed to replicate the styles of some of the world's most famous artists with uncanny accuracy. The FBI was amazed by the skill and audacity of the forger, who had even managed to create fake provenances and documentation to accompany the forgeries. But as they delved deeper into the world of forgery, they realized that the problem was far more widespread than they had initially thought. It seemed that forgery was not just a minor annoyance, but a major threat to the integrity of the art world, one that had the potential to undermine the entire system of art collecting and dealing. And yet, despite the many challenges and complexities, the FBI remained determined to get to the bottom of the case, to unravel the mystery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist and bring the perpetrators to justice. The investigation was now entering its final stages, and the FBI was closing in on the truth. They had identified several key suspects, including Robert Gentile and Robert Donati, and were preparing to bring them in for questioning. But just as it seemed like the case was finally about to be solved, a new twist emerged. It turned out that one of the stolen artworks, a rare Chinese vase, had been spotted in a small antique shop in Europe. The FBI was ecstatic, as this seemed to be the break they had been waiting for. But as they rushed to investigate, they realized that the vase was not what it seemed. It was a fake, a clever forgery that had been created to throw them off the scent. The FBI was back to square one, faced with the daunting task of re-examining all of the evidence and re-interviewing all of the suspects. But they refused to give up, driven by their determination to solve the case and recover the stolen artworks. And as they pressed on, they couldn't help but wonder what other surprises lay in store for them, what other twists and turns the investigation would take before they finally uncovered the truth. The investigation had now been ongoing for decades, and the FBI was no closer to recovering the stolen artworks. But they had made significant progress in understanding the scope and complexity of the crime, and had even managed to identify several key players. The case had also sparked a wider debate about the art world and its vulnerabilities, with many experts calling for greater transparency and accountability. The FBI had also developed new techniques and strategies for investigating art crimes, and had even established a special unit dedicated to this task. But despite all of these advances, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist remained a source of fascination and frustration. a reminder that even the most sophisticated and well-resourced investigations can sometimes fail to crack the toughest cases. And yet, the FBI remained committed to solving the case, driven by their determination to bring the perpetrators to justice and recover the stolen artworks. The investigation would continue, fueled by the hope that one day, the truth would finally be revealed, and the mystery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist would be solved once and for all. But for now, the case remained a puzzle, a complex and intriguing mystery that continued to captivate and inspire, a reminder that the truth is often more complex and surprising than we can ever imagine. As the years went by, the legend of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist only continued to grow, with the case becoming a kind of mythic symbol of the art world's darker underbelly. Theories and speculation continued to swirl, with some claiming that the stolen artworks had been hidden away in a secret vault, while others believed that they had been sold on the black market and were now in the possession of wealthy collectors. The FBI continued to receive tips and leads, but none of them seemed to pan out, and the case remained a frustrating and intriguing mystery. The museum itself had become a kind of shrine to the stolen artworks, with empty frames hanging on the walls as a poignant reminder of what had been lost. The heist had also inspired a new generation of art lovers and collectors who were determined to learn from the past and create a more transparent and accountable art world. And yet, despite all of these developments, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist remained a source of fascination and frustration, a reminder that the art world is often a complex and mysterious place, full of surprises and contradictions. But that wasn't the most surprising part. The FBI had recently received a new tip, one that suggested that the stolen artworks may still be hidden somewhere in the United States, waiting to be recovered and returned to their rightful owners. The new tip had come from an unexpected source, a former associate of one of the key suspects who had come forward with a dramatic revelation. According to this individual, the stolen artworks had been hidden away in a secret location, where they had remained for decades, waiting for the right moment to be recovered. The FBI was skeptical at first, but as they began to investigate the tip, they realized that it may be more credible than they had initially thought. The individual had provided a detailed description of the location, including the exact address and even a map of the surrounding area. The FBI was now racing against time to verify the tip and recover the stolen artworks, but they knew that they had to be careful, as they did not want to spook the perpetrators and cause them to destroy the evidence. The investigation was now entering its final stages, and the FBI was determined to solve the case and bring the perpetrators to justice. But as they closed in on the truth, they couldn't help but wonder what other surprises lay in store for them, what other twists and turns the investigation would take before they finally uncovered the truth. The FBI was now working around the clock to verify the new tip and recover the stolen artworks. They had assembled a team of experts, including art historians, conservators, and forensic specialists, to help them analyze the evidence and determine the authenticity of the tip. The team was working tirelessly to examine every detail, from the brushstrokes on the paintings to the patina on the sculptures. They were also using advanced technology, including X-rays and infrared scans, to examine the artworks and determine their provenance. The team's meticulous analysis was crucial in determining the authenticity of the tip, as even the slightest inconsistency could debunk the entire lead. They were scrutinizing every aspect, from the frame's gilding to the canvas's weave, to ensure that the artworks were indeed the stolen masterpieces. But as they delved deeper, they encountered a peculiar inconsistency. The frames of the paintings seemed to have been altered, with some of the original gilding removed and replaced with a newer, less intricate design. This raised questions about the handling and storage of the artworks over the years, and whether they had been intentionally altered to conceal their identity. The investigators were also poring over the security footage from the night of the heist, looking for any clues that might have been missed. They noticed a strange glitch in the tape, a brief moment where the image distorted and then corrected itself. But that wasn't the strangest part. When they enhanced the footage, they discovered a figure lurking in the shadows, just out of frame. The figure was partially obscured, making it impossible to discern any defining features, but its presence sparked a flurry of speculation. Was this an accomplice, or simply a bystander who had stumbled upon the scene? The answer remained elusive, leaving the team to ponder the possibilities. As the investigation continued, the team encountered a web of contradictions and inconsistencies. Some witnesses claimed to have seen the thieves fleeing the scene in a dark sedan, while others described a different vehicle altogether. The descriptions of the thieves themselves were also inconsistent, with some accounts describing them as wearing police uniforms, while others claimed they were dressed in casual clothing. The contradictions were frustrating, but they also hinted at a larger, more complex scheme. It was possible that the thieves had deliberately spread misinformation to confuse the authorities, or that there were multiple individuals involved, each with their own agenda. The team's analysis of the artworks themselves was also yielding some surprising results. The X-rays and infrared scans revealed hidden layers and underpaintings, which provided valuable insights into the artist's techniques and creative processes. But they also uncovered some unexpected anomalies: a faint signature on the edge of one painting, a cryptic message scrawled on the back of another. These discoveries sparked a heated debate among the experts, with some arguing that they were genuine, while others dismissed them as forgeries. The controversy surrounding the artwork's authenticity was escalating, with each new revelation raising more questions than answers. The investigation was now entering its most critical phase, with the team racing against time to verify the tip and recover the stolen masterpieces. They were working around the clock, following up on every lead, no matter how tenuous. But as they closed in on the truth, they realized that they were not the only ones searching for the artworks. A rival collector, known for his ruthless tactics, had also caught wind of the tip and was now hot on the trail. The stakes were escalating, with the team facing off against a formidable opponent who would stop at nothing to claim the artworks for himself. The outcome was far from certain, and the team could only wonder what would happen next. The team's efforts were now focused on outmaneuvering their rival and retrieving the stolen masterpieces. They were navigating a complex web of underworld figures and black market dealers, each with their own agenda and motivations. The tension was palpable, as the team waited with bated breath for the next development. But as they stood at the threshold of a major breakthrough, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen forces were manipulating the investigation from the shadows. The mystery of the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist was far from solved, and the team was about to uncover a shocking twist that would change everything. What would they find when they finally uncovered the truth about the stolen artworks? And would it lead them to the masterminds behind the world's most infamous art heist? As the investigators delved deeper into the case, they began to notice a peculiar pattern. The thieves seemed to have a keen eye for the most valuable and historically significant pieces, but they also left behind some equally valuable items, almost as if they were making a statement. Theories emerged that the heist might not have been just about the monetary value of the artworks, but also about the prestige and notoriety that came with pulling off such a daring crime. But what was the motivation behind this brazen act, and how did the thieves manage to evade capture for so long? The FBI's investigation led them to a cast of characters that seemed to be shrouded in mystery. There was Robert Gentile, a convicted felon with ties to the mafia, who claimed to have information about the heist, but was reluctant to cooperate. Then there was Robert Donati, a former mafia associate who had been implicated in the heist, but had since passed away. The more the investigators dug, the more they realized that the truth behind the heist was tangled in a web of organized crime and corruption. But that wasn't the strangest part. It was the fact that the thieves seemed to have had inside help, and the museum's own security team was being scrutinized for potential involvement. As the years went by, the case remained unsolved, and the public's fascination with the heist only grew. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum offered a reward of $10 million for information leading to the recovery of the stolen artworks, but the trail had gone cold. The investigation was at a standstill, and it seemed as though the thieves had gotten away with the perfect crime. But then, in 1997, a breakthrough came in the form of a cryptic letter sent to the museum's director. The letter claimed that the artworks were safe and would be returned if the museum agreed to certain conditions. The catch was that the letter was unsigned, and the authenticity of the claim was impossible to verify. The FBI was skeptical, but they couldn't afford to ignore the possibility that the letter might be genuine. They launched a new investigation, following a trail of leads that took them from the streets of Boston to the back alleys of Italy. It was a daunting task, but the agents were driven by the hope that they might finally uncover the truth behind the heist. As they dug deeper, They began to unravel a complex web of deceit and corruption that went far beyond a simple theft. The case was taking on a life of its own, with twists and turns that seemed to defy explanation. But what was the significance of the letter, and who was behind it? Was it a genuine attempt to return the artworks, or just a clever ruse to throw the investigators off the scent? The investigation led to a surprising revelation. The thieves had apparently used a fake police car to gain entry to the museum, and the security guards had been duped into letting them in. It was a brazen move, and one that raised more questions than answers. How had the thieves managed to obtain a fake police car, and who had provided them with the inside information they needed to pull off the heist? The more the investigators learned, the more they realized that the case was far more complex than they had initially thought. But that wasn't the only surprising twist. It turned out that the museum's own security team had been warned about a potential threat just days before the heist, but they had failed to take action. As the years turned into decades, the case of the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist became a legendary mystery, with many theories and suspects emerging. Some believed that the heist was the work of a notorious art thief known as the Fox, while others thought it might have been an inside job. The truth, however, remained elusive, and the artworks remained lost. But then, in 2013, the FBI announced that they had made a breakthrough in the case. They claimed to have identified the thieves and were closing in on the location of the stolen artworks. The news sparked a flurry of excitement, but it also raised more questions. What had taken the FBI so long to make a breakthrough, and why were they so confident that they had finally solved the case? The FBI's announcement was met with a mixture of skepticism and hope. Many believed that the case was finally on the verge of being solved, while others thought it was just another false lead. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the truth behind the heist was far more complex than anyone had imagined. The thieves had left behind a trail of clues, but they had also covered their tracks with a web of deceit and misdirection. The FBI was faced with the daunting task of untangling the threads of the mystery, and it seemed as though they were getting close to the truth. But just as it seemed like the case was finally being cracked, a new complication emerged. A former mafia hitman came forward claiming to have information about the heist, but his testimony was tainted by his own questionable past. The hitman's testimony was a bombshell, but it was also a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it provided a possible lead in the case, but on the other hand, it raised questions about the hitman's credibility. The FBI was faced with the difficult task of verifying the hitman's claims, and it seemed as though they were walking a tightrope. One wrong move could send the entire investigation crashing down, and the truth behind the heist would remain lost forever. But the FBI was determined to see justice served, and they pressed on, following every lead, no matter how small. The case was a labyrinth, and the agents were navigating its twists and turns with caution, always mindful of the fact that the truth was hidden behind a veil of secrecy. As the investigation continued, the FBI began to piece together the events of that fateful night. They discovered that the thieves had used a combination of cunning and brute force to gain entry to the museum, and that they had been helped by a mole within the museum's security team. The revelation was shocking, and it raised questions about the museum's own role in the heist. Had the museum's security team been complicit in the theft, or had they simply been duped by the thieves? The answer, it seemed, lay in the complex web of relationships between the museum, the thieves, and the organized crime syndicates that had been involved in the heist. But just as the FBI thought they were getting close to the truth, they received a cryptic message from an unknown sender. It was a warning, telling them to back off the case, or else. The message was a chilling reminder that the case was far from over and that the stakes were still high. The FBI was faced with a difficult decision. Should they continue to pursue the case, or should they heed the warning and back off? The answer, it seemed, lay in the bravery and determination of the agents, who were driven by a desire to see justice served. They refused to back down, and they pressed on, following every lead, no matter how small. The case was a roller coaster, with twists and turns that seemed to defy explanation, but the FBI was determined to stay on the ride, no matter where it took them. As they delved deeper into the mystery, they began to uncover a complex web of deceit and corruption that went far beyond a simple theft. It was a web that threatened to ensnare everyone involved, including the investigators themselves. The investigation was a minefield, and the FBI was navigating it with caution. Every step they took, every lead they followed, seemed to lead to more questions, more complications. But they refused to give up, driven by a desire to uncover the truth behind the heist. The case was a puzzle, and the FBI was determined to solve it, no matter what it took. As they worked tirelessly to piece together the events of that fateful night, they began to realize that the truth was far more complex than they had ever imagined. The heist was not just a simple theft, it was a symptom of a larger problem, a problem that went to the heart of the art world itself. The FBI was on a mission to uncover the truth, and they would stop at nothing to see justice served. As the years went by, the case of the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist became a legendary mystery, a reminder that even the most seemingly impossible crimes can be solved with determination and perseverance. The FBI's investigation was a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the importance of never giving up. The case was a labyrinth, but the FBI was determined to navigate its twists and turns, no matter where they led. The truth behind the heist was still out there, waiting to be uncovered, and the FBI was driven by a desire to uncover it. The investigation was a journey into the unknown, a journey that would take them to the darkest corners of the art world and beyond. But the FBI was ready for the challenge, and they would stop at nothing to uncover the truth behind the world's most famous art heist. The art world was shaken to its core by the heist, and the FBI's investigation had sent shockwaves through the community. The case had raised questions about the security of museums and the value of art, and it had sparked a debate about the role of law enforcement in protecting cultural heritage. The FBI's determination to solve the case had sent a message to would-be thieves that the authorities would stop at nothing to protect the world's most valuable treasures. But as the investigation continued, it became clear that the case was far from over. The truth behind the heist was still out there, waiting to be uncovered, and the FBI was driven by a desire to uncover it. The case was a reminder that even the most seemingly impossible crimes can be solved with determination and perseverance, and it would go down in history as one of the most famous art thefts of all time. The FBI's investigation had also shed light on the darker side of the art world, a world of corruption and deceit that few people knew existed. The case had raised questions about the authenticity of artworks and the role of dealers and collectors in the art market. The FBI's determination to solve the case had sent a message to the art world that the authorities would no longer tolerate the kind of corruption and deceit that had led to the heist. The case was a wake-up call for the art world, a reminder that the value of art goes beyond its monetary value. The FBI's investigation had shown that art was not just a commodity to be bought and sold, but a cultural treasure that deserved to be protected. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the case was far from over, and that the truth behind the heist was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The FBI's investigation was a complex and challenging one, and it had required the expertise of some of the best agents in the business. The case had involved a vast array of characters, from thieves and con artists to corrupt dealers and collectors. The FBI had followed a trail of clues that had taken them from the streets of Boston to the back alleys of Italy, and they had uncovered a web of deceit and corruption that went far beyond a simple theft. The case was a puzzle, and the FBI was determined to solve it, no matter what it took. As they worked tirelessly to piece together the events of that fateful night, they began to realize that the truth was far more complex than they had ever imagined. The heist was not just a simple theft, it was a symptom of a larger problem, a problem that went to the heart of the art world itself. The FBI's investigation had also raised questions about the role of law enforcement in protecting cultural heritage. The case had shown that the authorities had a critical role to play in protecting the world's most valuable treasures, and that they would stop at nothing to solve crimes that involved the theft of cultural artifacts. The FBI's determination to solve the case had sent a message to would-be thieves that the authorities would not tolerate the kind of corruption and deceit that had led to the heist. The case was a reminder that art was not just a commodity to be bought and sold, but a cultural treasure that deserved to be protected. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the case was far from over, and that the truth behind the heist was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The FBI was driven by a desire to uncover the truth, and they would stop at nothing to see justice served. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Heist was a crime that had shaken the art world to its core, and the FBI's investigation had sent shockwaves through the community. The case had raised questions about the security of museums and the value of art, and it had sparked a debate about the role of law enforcement in protecting cultural heritage. The FBI's determination to solve the case had sent a message to would-be thieves that the authorities would stop at nothing to protect the world's most valuable treasures. The case was a reminder that even the most seemingly impossible crimes can be solved with determination and perseverance, and it would go down in history as one of the most famous art thefts of all time. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the case was far from over, and that the truth behind the heist was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The FBI was driven by a desire to uncover the truth, and they would stop at nothing to see justice served. The FBI's investigation had also shed light on the complex web of relationships between the museum, the thieves, and the organized crime syndicates that had been involved in the heist. The case had shown that the art world was not just a world of beauty and creativity, but also a world of corruption and deceit. The FBI's determination to solve the case had sent a message to the art world that the authorities would no longer tolerate the kind of corruption and deceit that had led to the heist. The case was a wake-up call for the art world, a reminder that the value of art goes beyond its monetary value. The FBI's investigation had shown that art was not just a commodity to be bought and sold, but a cultural treasure that deserved to be protected. As the investigation continued, the FBI's investigation had shown that art was not just a commodity to be bought and sold, but a cultural treasure that deserved to be protected. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the thieves had not only stolen valuable artworks, but had also left behind a trail of cryptic clues and misdirection. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case was the fact that the thieves had seemed to know exactly what they were looking for, targeting specific pieces that were not only valuable, but also held significant cultural and historical significance. But that wasn't the strangest part. The thieves had also seemed to deliberately avoid stealing other highly valuable pieces that were on display, almost as if they had been instructed to leave certain items behind. This level of sophistication and planning raised more questions than answers, and the FBI found themselves grappling with the possibility that the heist had been an inside job. As they dug deeper, they discovered that the museum's security system had been woefully inadequate, with guards who were poorly trained and a lack of basic security protocols in place. But what really caught their attention was the fact that the museum's director, Roland Richardson, had been acting strangely in the months leading up to the heist, making large purchases and exhibiting unusual behavior that some interpreted as signs of financial desperation. It was as if Richardson had been expecting something to happen, but what exactly remained unclear. The investigation also revealed that the thieves had used a combination of social engineering and technical expertise to gain access to the museum. They had posed as police officers, convincing the security guard to let them in, and then had used their knowledge of the museum's layout to quickly and efficiently remove the artworks. But the level of technical expertise required to pull off such a heist was impressive, and it seemed unlikely that the thieves had acted alone. The FBI began to suspect that the heist had been orchestrated by a larger organization, possibly with ties to the art world or even organized crime. As they followed this lead, they discovered a complex web of connections and relationships that seemed to point to a larger conspiracy. One of the most significant leads in the case was the discovery of a cryptic message that had been left behind by the thieves. The message, which read, "You will never find them," seemed to taunt the authorities and imply that the artworks were gone forever. But the FBI was not deterred, and they continued to follow every lead, no matter how small. They interviewed numerous suspects, including a number of individuals who had been known to be involved in the art world, and they also conducted extensive forensic analysis of the crime scene. As they delved deeper into the case, they began to uncover a trail of evidence that suggested the heist had been just one part of a larger scheme. The FBI's investigation also shed light on the fact that the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum had been struggling financially in the years leading up to the heist. The museum's endowment had been dwindling, and the trustees had been facing significant pressure to cut costs and increase revenue. This had led to a number of controversies, including the sale of several valuable artworks from the museum's collection. It was as if the museum had been ripe for the picking, and the thieves had taken advantage of the situation. But what was not clear was whether the heist had been specifically designed to take advantage of the museum's financial struggles, or if it had simply been a coincidence. As the investigation continued, the FBI began to suspect that the heist had been motivated by more than just financial gain. The thieves had seemed to be driven by a desire to acquire the artworks for themselves, rather than simply to sell them on the black market. This raised questions about the role of collectors and the art market in the heist, and whether certain individuals or organizations had been secretly funding the thieves. The FBI's investigation had also revealed that several prominent collectors had been known to have dealings with shady characters, and that some had even been accused of buying and selling stolen artworks. It was a complex and murky world, and the FBI was determined to get to the bottom of it. The case was also notable for the number of false leads and red herrings that had been planted by the thieves. The FBI had received numerous tips and sightings, but most of them had turned out to be bogus. It was as if the thieves had deliberately tried to confuse and mislead the authorities, using a variety of tactics to throw them off the scent. But the FBI was not deterred, and they continued to follow every lead, no matter how small. They were determined to solve the case and to bring the perpetrators to justice. As they dug deeper, they began to uncover a trail of evidence that suggested the heist had been just one part of a larger scheme, one that involved a complex web of characters and motives. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case was the role of Robert Gentile, a man who had been known to be involved in the art world. Gentile had been a friend of Robert Donati, a man who had been suspected of being involved in the heist. Donati had died in 1991, but Gentile had continued to be a person of interest in the case. The FBI had searched Gentile's home and found a number of suspicious items, including a letter that seemed to suggest he had knowledge of the heist. But Gentile had denied any involvement, and the FBI had been unable to prove that he had been directly involved. It was a frustrating development, but the FBI was determined to keep following the lead, no matter where it might go. The investigation had also revealed that the heist had been carried out with a level of precision and planning that was unprecedented. The thieves had seemed to know exactly what they were looking for, and had been able to navigate the museum's complex layout with ease. It was as if they had had inside help, or had been able to gather detailed information about the museum's security systems. The FBI had been unable to determine exactly how the thieves had gained this knowledge, but it was clear that they had been highly sophisticated and well-organized. As the investigation continued, the FBI began to suspect that the heist had been just one part of a larger operation, one that involved a complex web of characters and motives. The case was also notable for the number of conspiracy theories that had sprung up around it. Some people believed that the heist had been carried out by a government agency, or that it had been orchestrated by a wealthy collector. Others believed that the heist had been an inside job, carried out by someone with a grudge against the museum. But the FBI had found no evidence to support these theories, and they had continued to focus on the evidence that they had uncovered. As they dug deeper, they began to uncover a trail of evidence that suggested the heist had been just one part of a larger scheme, one that involved a complex web of characters and motives. As the years passed, the case remained unsolved, but the FBI continued to follow every lead, no matter how small. They had received numerous tips and sightings, but most of them had turned out to be bogus. It was as if the thieves had deliberately tried to confuse and mislead the authorities, using a variety of tactics to throw them off the scent. But the FBI was determined to solve the case and to bring the perpetrators to justice. They were driven by a desire to recover the stolen artworks and to restore them to their rightful place in the museum. It was a complex and challenging case, but the FBI was determined to see it through to the end. The investigation had also shed light on the fact that the art world was a complex and often murky place. The FBI had discovered that many collectors and dealers were willing to turn a blind eye to the provenance of piece, as long as it was valuable and desirable. This had created a culture of secrecy and corruption, where stolen artworks could be bought and sold with impunity. The FBI had been working to change this culture and to make it more difficult for stolen artworks to be sold on the black market. But it was a difficult task, and one that required the cooperation of collectors, dealers, and law enforcement agencies around the world. The case was also notable for the impact it had had on the museum and the community. The heist had been a devastating blow, and it had left the museum reeling. The trustees had been forced to confront the fact that their security systems had been inadequate and that they had been vulnerable to theft. They had taken steps to improve security, but the damage had already been done. The heist had also had a profound impact on the community, with many people feeling a sense of loss and outrage. The FBI had been working to address these concerns and to provide support to the museum and the community. It was a complex and challenging task, but one that was essential to solving the case and bringing the perpetrators to justice. As the investigation continued, the FBI began to suspect that the heist had been motivated by a desire to acquire the artworks for personal gain. The thieves had seemed to be driven by a desire to possess the artworks, rather than simply to sell them on the black market. This raised questions about the role of collectors and the art market in the heist, and whether certain individuals or organizations had been secretly funding the thieves. The FBI's investigation had also revealed that several prominent collectors had been known to have dealings with shady characters, and that some had even been accused of buying and selling stolen artworks. It was a complex and murky world, and the FBI was determined to get to the bottom of it. The case was also notable for the number of twists and turns that it had taken. The FBI had received numerous tips and sightings, but most of them had turned out to be bogus. It was as if the thieves had deliberately tried to confuse and mislead the authorities, using a variety of tactics to throw them off the scent. But the FBI was determined to solve the case and to bring the perpetrators to justice. They were driven by a desire to recover the stolen artworks and to restore them to their rightful place in the museum. As they dug deeper, they began to uncover a trail of evidence that suggested the heist had been just one part of a larger scheme, one that involved a complex web of characters and motives. The investigation had also revealed that the heist had been carried out with a level of precision and planning that was unprecedented. The thieves had seemed to know exactly what they were looking for and had been able to navigate the museum's complex layout with ease. It was as if they had had inside help or had been able to gather detailed information about the museum's security systems. The FBI had been unable to determine exactly how the thieves had gained this knowledge, but it was clear that they had been highly sophisticated and well-organized. As the investigation continued, the FBI began to suspect that the heist had been just one part of a larger operation, one that involved a complex web of characters and motives. The case was also notable for the impact it had had on the art world. The heist had been a wake-up call, highlighting the vulnerability of museums and the need for improved security. It had also raised questions about the role of collectors and the art market in the heist, and whether certain individuals or organizations had been secretly funding the thieves. The FBI had been working to address these concerns and to make it more difficult for stolen artworks to be sold on the black market. But it was a difficult task, and one that required the cooperation of collectors, dealers, and law enforcement agencies around the world. As the years passed, the case remained unsolved, but the FBI continued to follow every lead, no matter how small. They had received numerous tips and sightings, but most of them had turned out to be bogus. It was as if the thieves had deliberately tried to confuse and mislead the authorities, using a variety of tactics to throw them off the scent. But the FBI was determined to solve the case and to bring the perpetrators to justice. They were driven by a desire to recover the stolen artworks and to restore them to their rightful place in the museum. It was a complex and challenging case, but the FBI was determined to see it through to the end. The investigation had also shed light on the fact that the art world was a complex and often murky place. The FBI had discovered that many collectors and dealers were willing to turn a blind eye to the provenance of piece, as long as it was valuable and desirable. This had created a culture of secrecy and corruption, where stolen artworks could be bought and sold with impunity. The FBI had been working to change this culture and to make it more difficult for stolen artworks to be sold on the black market. But it was a difficult task, and one that required the cooperation of collectors, dealers, and law enforcement agencies around the world. The case was also notable for the number of conspiracy theories that had sprung up around it. Some people believed that the heist had been carried out by a government agency or that it had been orchestrated by a wealthy collector. Others believed that the heist had been an inside job, carried out by someone with a grudge against the museum. But the FBI had found no evidence to support these theories, and they had continued to focus on the evidence that they had uncovered. As they dug deeper, they began to uncover